So first of all, Mark, thank you for sending me the volumes. That's really helpful, and I can send across a pricing proposal following, so you can obviously review the system today and then the pricing based on volumes as well. One quick question, whether you had a chance to think about it, is the number of users that you would anticipate logging into the system. So that would be anyone within accounts payable, processing invoices, any approvers that might be authorizing invoices across different departments or units or anything else, and then we can have a look at the demo. But if there were anyone raising orders within the system, that would also incorporate those individuals. So from an accounts payable perspective, do you know roughly how many people would be logging in and requiring access? And that will help us build your pricing proposal thereafter.
I'm coming up with a rough number right now.
That would be great. Thank you.
I'm not 100% sure. I just pulled up our signature authorization list.
That's what I'm at right now.
And it's about 98 people, and that's not including AP staff. So it'd probably be just over 100 something. Would be a decent rough number. That's the people we have that can sign documents. So
okay, fine. So they would be involved in the accounts payable.
The people that have, in theory, would have some role in processing a request for payment. There's Kim.
Oh, Kim has joined. Hi, Kim.
Hello.
We're recording just in case you couldn't join, but good to have you.
Yeah, I may need that recording anyway. My brain's not on 100% yet.
No worries. It'll be recorded for anyone who wants to revert back. And I think, John, you've joined as well. So we've got everyone, and we can make a start. So what I wanted to do just to begin with is just summarize our last conversation, just to make sure I've got an understanding of your processes now, and then if there's anything you want to add or cover during the session today, then let me know. So our previous conversation, you talked about your paper-based accounts payable process, hence the conversation today and demonstration. You're receiving invoices from vendors and also staff reimbursements all within one accounts payable email address, and then there are a lot of moving parts and different transactions to process, so keeping track of those invoices and processing them in general is quite difficult and time consuming. You mentioned the invoice line level input when you are inputting those kind of manually into MIP, issues with timing out when you might have 30 lines on an invoice, whether that was a common or drastic example. That's I do remember that from the last conversation in terms of making that data, from the invoice, inputting that into MIP, saving time and streamlining that process was something that you referenced. In terms of the approval process, you did mention your different units, which is a segment which you're tracking invoices against. I believe that's related to your contracts, and then you have different approval workflows based on that dollar values, which are included within that, dependent on if it's over $1,000 or $50,000. I think were the two kind of threshold examples that you gave. And then you did talk through the different segments that you're using with the GL codes, the fund, which is usually defaulted into 1 or 2 or 3. I think I've got 2/3, so I think that's in relation to the fund. And then you've got the units, which are your contracts, using the program or department field. And then you've got the project location, which is tracking your departments. Let me know if I've got all of this right, or whether any of that needs a refresh or more information. And then you're also using the distribution code. So when you're needing to allocate one invoice across multiple properties, then you're kind of splitting out costs, or the percentage of that invoice, and splitting it across properties from an accounting perspective as well, which might be related to a utility bill contract or something like that. Is there anything I've missed in terms of those elements that we discussed? I know we also talked through how you're placing orders for, medical supplies, how that's being requested, and they're inputting the GL and unit or contracts. Supervisors are signing those off, and you've got kind of DocuSign, PDFs, Adobe being used within that purchasing process, sent to accounts payable, printed. Michelle has a fun job there on all fronts, handling the processing of that, potentially correcting GLs or reconciling invoices back to orders that have been placed with suppliers when we look at the front end and purchasing side.
That would include all our MIS purchasing as well.
Okay. And then, yeah, in terms of the kind of segments, did I get that explanation right? I know we covered quite a few different things last time, or was there anything that I got wrong within there, or anything that needs to be elaborated on?
It was pretty close to right. We use, like, the unit is really like the program or the department type thing, and project code is really used mostly for location. So it's used a lot to when we have a facility related cost, capturing which one of our buildings that facility cost is occurred at.
Okay. So the unit would be, I think you said like the facilities department or something like that.
Yeah, the unit would be like accounting, facilities, or this CCBH something program, or this, SAMHSA program. So that's really our cost center. Units are main cost center / department designation.
Okay.
And then project is really mostly used for physical locations. We can use it for other things, but that's the main use for it.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Fine. Well, what I'll do is I'll take you through the system now. I'll log in. I'll show you the accounts payable function to start with. So how we're receiving invoices, how we're capturing the data, how those can be coded, sent for approval, and then transferred into MIP. And we've got John on the call who will be able to kind of assist with the integration piece. And then maybe as a secondary, but you have referenced the purchasing process. So if you want to learn more about how that can be incorporated into the system, then also happy to take you through and provide a bit of an overview of how that can be tied in to include purchasing automation and matching within the accounts payable process. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So Compleat is a cloud-based application, so you can access it via any web browser, and each user will be logging in with their email address and password, which will be set up within their account. And then we do also offer, talking of Microsoft Azure single sign-on if that wants to be leveraged as well. So as I log into the system, we have different user profiles that can be set up within the application. So within my demonstration system, I've got absolutely everything turned on, so I can show you whatever you might want to learn more about today. But in reality, you're going to have different roles. So Michelle, you're going to want to see all invoices that are coming in. You're going to want to be able to edit codes, process those for approval, and then see the end-to-end journey of those invoices within Compleat and MIP. Yes, Michelle.
Question. So I'm looking at all these vendors that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So like McKesson, would we get any special pricing going through you? Because that's we buy all of our medical supplies through McKesson. We buy all of our office supplies through Staples. We're very interested in getting into an Amazon business account situation.
Yep.
Would we get special pricing through going through your platform with any of these? Like right now, Staples, we already get special pricing. Would that transfer over through your platform?
Yeah, so essentially the integrated online buying enables our customers to click on the supplier or vendor that they want to purchase from. So if that's Staples, it will take you directly to the vendor's website. If you have preferential prices with them, then you'll be able to log in and access your preferential prices as normal. And then essentially we are capturing the basket information into a requisition form within the Compleat application. So we're automating that purchasing experience by capturing the cost commitments essentially within a requisition form. Those can be sent for approval. So if the supervisor needed to authorize the office supplies before you completed that purchase with Staples, it provides that control, approval and visibility to finance. And then when you receive that invoice, it can then be matched off automatically against the order that has been placed. So if the GL account code has already been coded up front, for example, then the invoice will be matched to that and you wouldn't then have to make any decisions on the invoice when it arrives. So provides that extra level of automation from an AP perspective, and then the controls and centralized purchasing across all of your preferred vendors within one centralized application on Compleat.
Okay, so like with Staples right now, our Staples, we have many user accounts. So we have one Staples account, we have many users. When they need to set up for a Staples account, they come to us, we set them up with a user. When they log in, it already has our GLs logged in to our Staples. It's already, locked in with our Staples. I think some of our units are already in there. I've never really ordered through Staples because I don't have an account. I have no use to order from them. I just pay the bills. But I think that is already loaded with all of our company information. So that would all migrate over through. So that would all still be there if we were to purchase through your platform to log into these large accounts.
So we capture the basket information, including the item codes, descriptions, values, and then of course the fact it's Staples, whoever is requesting that purchase, or the user within Compleat. In terms of your account codes and your segments that you use within MIP, we're integrating with those segments and that list essentially. So that's all stored within Compleat. That's set up within our application. So for example, Staples might offer that functionality within their platform, but 3 of the vendors that you purchase with might not. So Compleat is the source of, this is a real-time sync, or this is a live sync with your segments within MIP, because it's integrated, whereas on Staples you'll have to go onto that website and add it in yourself. So if anything changed, you'd have to go and update Staples. So it's disjointed from MIP. So Compleat looks to essentially replace the need to capture those codes on each website. If it's available, it captures it and adds those rules within Compleat. So if I was raising an order for Staples and I sat within your facilities department, let's say, then that particular segment, so that unit could be defaulted against my profile, because that I sit within facilities. The GL codes can be segmented based on what you purchase from Staples as a particular vendor, and then the same with any of your other MIP segments as well. So we would put all of the logic and defaults required against all of your vendors, and then have them all accessible within this screen if you wanted to adopt integrated online buying.
Okay, great.
Does that make sense?
You. Yeah, it does. It's going to streamline. We're going to all go through, instead of having to update each individual account every time there's something that it gets changed, we update through you, and that transfers to all of our accounts.
Exactly. And for example, we have a partnership with Amazon, and they introduced this to their clients because it's a much more seamless way of transacting with them, because not only does it automate the invoice reconciliation side, it means that because we're synced with the accounting system, we can control, have a real-time up-to-date view of what segments you're using, and then centralize purchasing across all of those as well. Okay.
Okay.
Well, you've railroaded my demo because I was going to start on AP automation and then we have a look at these, but that's changed things somewhat. I will still start at the invoices that you've sent me,
Okay,
and
great.
then we can come back to this and look at how that can further automate control and add workflow and integration around the buying piece as well, because that all sounds very relevant now, and I'm glad that it's all up on screen, so you thought of it as I logged in.
Yeah, I'm very, very interested in the Amazon, the Amazon vendor.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyways, I will listen now. I will put on my ears.
I'm glad you're interested in that though. Okay, so just some general kind of elements of the system. So the user profiles, I was talking about the accounts payable role. So managing invoices would be a section that you would obviously have access to, and would be an area that you would be accessing frequently to look at invoices that have been sent in from your vendors. We can also have particular users that kind of access the configuration. So if you needed to change workflows or add a user, all of those, general permissions, then you can assign specific admin users. And then if you do hopefully leverage the integrated online buying and purchasing side, then you can have access to create new requisitions, purchase orders, and access the particular integrated online buying sites that you purchase from. So Staples, McKesson, Amazon Business, etc. And that might be extended to other vendors as well. I think one of the invoices you sent to me, AED123, I don't know if you buy from them frequently, but I had a quick look and they have a basket facility and a website that you can purchase from. So there might be other vendors like that are relevant to also add in here, which would also automate that end-to-end experience for you.
Okay.
We've got an email address here, so a centralized email address where all vendor invoices can be sent to, either directly from your vendors or frequently our customers will have an auto forward set up, so you can continue to use your current accounts at email address that has already been issued to your vendors, and that all of those invoices can essentially be auto forwarded to our system, and then we will initiate the invoice data capture process, only recording and processing transactions which are invoices or credit memos. Essentially any other transactions, documents, we wouldn't touch, we would ignore essentially when they get forwarded into the system, and we can go through that in more detail. So if I just click on the manage invoices side and just give you a bit of an overview how this is working. So as invoices are sent to that email address, we are capturing the data. So you'll see there's tray pages at the top here to filter invoices dependent on their status. So if there is an action required, then the invoice will fall into the unprocessed tray page, which is essentially just a centralized cloud-based inbox where you have a digital form of the invoice and all of the data has been captured for you to remove the manual intervention in terms of keying in invoice data. So if I were to just click on one of your examples, Michelle, that you kindly sent across, we are capturing the header and line level invoice data, and it utilizes AI technology in order to capture and extract all of that information. So this is the information off of the invoice. Carry on.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. Okay. I got excited.
Sure.
So basically, these are invoices that have come into our accounts payable at Integral Care email. Mm-hmm. And this system has basically looked at all of those invoices that have come and categorized them for us.
Essentially anything that's an invoice, it is capturing the header and line data and then downloading it into this application, so you can view any invoices that you've received from vendors, and you can, we'll see in a second, decide what you want to do with them. And there's going to be different scenarios based on, is it an invoice without an order? Let's say you haven't used the integrated online buying, you haven't raised an order. There's direct invoices that can just be captured, coded, approved, and sent directly into MIP. And then there's additional automation, obviously visibility and control you can gain from using the purchasing piece as well, which we can talk about.
Okay, so then my question is, see where it says no PO reference. In the beginning of the year, the beginning of the fiscal year, we get standing purchase orders from many units for many services across. Okay, so in the beginning of the year, when I get those standing purchase orders, can I load them into your system so that as those invoices come into AP throughout the year, instead of saying no PO reference, what it's going to do is reference the standing PO that we received at the beginning of the fiscal year. And it's going to be matching those invoices throughout the year to that standing PO. Am I correct?
So there's two options with that. What format do you get them in when you get issued with a standing
standing
PO?
purchase order? It's a like I said, we're very out of date around here.
That's okay.
So basically we have just this very simple Excel spreadsheet, and it's set up like a check request, basically saying, you know, I authorize you to pay this bill. It's basically a very loose form that says, I authorize AP to pay all of my invoices that come in throughout this fiscal year that are for these services, this location.
Okay.
And then all I do is scan them and hold them in our on our cloud, basically. And I have a spreadsheet. So I'm manually, as each one of those invoices come, I'm manually looking at the standing PO spreadsheet to see if that invoice is covered under that.
Sure.
Okay, so now that is going to eliminate some of that work. I'm going to be loading that information in the beginning of the year and bypassing that step when every invoice throughout the year comes in.
Yeah, so we do have what you could use for that is our PO import function, which essentially you can upload an Excel spreadsheet and then record purchase orders that have been pre-authorized essentially. So that would record, and we can see what information would be required, but you know, vendor, value, PO number, might have location, GL account code defaulted within there because that's all been pre-agreed and those costs are allocated to certain departments, let's say, for example, or particular locations. So all of that could be imported however frequently that you wanted it to. And then if the PO number is referenced on the invoice, we can tie it back and decipher whether it matches, whether the values are different, and you've got then more information to play with, and it's all centrally within the same system as well.
Okay, one more question and I'll go back to listening.
Okay.
So does this system have a way of tracking budget so that people say they have X amount of dollars that are for, my screen keeps going black, I'm sorry. So if I have X amount of dollars in the budget for this service of disinfecting this site, will that show to the managers of that location to show where they're at in their budget? Because it's going to be tied maybe to a purchase order. So I'm going to say purchase order for disinfecting this location. Will that tie into a budget so the managers can see how much they have spent towards that service?
So the budget would be the whole PO or the separate budget that there would be multiple invoices and orders against a certain month? How would the budget be broken down?
Well, that gets into Joe's area. That so I don't want to speak to that because that starts getting into Joe's area of how budgets are set up. I'm just wondering because I do get questions from managers saying, how much have I spent for this type of service because we're doing budgets and I need to, you know, so here comes the new fiscal year. I get a lot of managers coming to me and saying, how much did I spend in this? How much did I spend for that? So I'm just wondering if Joe's budget can be tied in together with this system.
Yeah, so that one might need another conversation. So we do have the ability to store budgets within Compleat, but they're not currently integrated with MIP. So if you're storing budgets, and it will depend on how you're breaking them down, but if you're breaking them down based on, you know, department location and GL code level, then inputting that and keeping those in sync would be an onerous task, having them in two separate systems. However, if you wanted to store higher level budgets in Compleat, if that would be relevant, so it's like, oh, this is the total for that department across the month or year, and then have some tracking for, you know, their purposes to say this is where I am in total for this period, then those kind of budget monitoring reports can be set up within the system to track commitments or actual costs within Compleat. But in terms of granular budget management and the reports that go with that, MIP is obviously the source of truth when it comes to all of your actual costs, any other costs that you have coming out of you know, MIP within your accounting system. So we can definitely have a conversation about that, and there is functionality to support departmental or location or higher level budget management if required.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay, so this is one of your invoices on the left-hand side. So just a quick note, you may receive invoices in a variety of different formats, might be PDF, Word, Excel, all sorts. I think there were a PDF and Excel sent, Michelle, in your examples, but some of them look like one of them looked like a paper scanned as well that's been converted to a PDF. So there's going to be lots of different scenarios. So essentially the point is we can process all of those documents. We always convert them to a PDF format. As many that can come in as a PDF and that are emailed directly from vendors, obviously the better, because they're better quality documents. So AI reading them is a lot quicker. But if you do have paper scanned ones that are sent in, we do have OCR technology to essentially scan, see what data there is, produce data where there isn't, and then run it through our AI technology. So you get to the same result, just slightly less fast as the true digital documents, if that makes sense. So in all cases, we're capturing the header and line data, and then there's a couple of different options really in terms of coding, and this will depend on the scenarios. So I'll just take you through the features and functions, and then any questions that you have, just let me know. So in this particular scenario, and granted, given the explanation at the beginning, I've got some of these wrong from our conversation, so you have to bear with me. But you'll have different segments that you need to code against invoices where possible. So I'm just going to edit this so you can see. You can set vendor defaults. So if you said, okay, for this vendor, it always goes to this GL account code, for example, you could set that as a default. The same with if there was a not contract but department with your unit field, and then if there's a particular fund that it always gets allocated to, etc. So we're essentially integrating with your MIP segments, and then defaults can be set within the system, and also at a more granular level where appropriate, if there's particular lines that incorporate, you know, a word, you might say if you know, hygiene is within the invoice, then always set it to this GL account code. So you can get granular and clever where appropriate as well. You have a view of all of the different lines, so if you needed to delete or duplicate anything for any reason, it's easy to make decisions on the invoice if you do need to make any changes. And then if I go back to the first screen, you'll be able to see a nice quick actions button here. So if you did need to select a particular segment, if you wanted to search for something, so a particular department, you could then decide, okay, I want that to be across all lines, or I want it to be across particular lines. So you can decide for each segment, either having them defaulted or where additional selections you might need to make, then you can easily do that within the system as well, and all will be available to you across lines or at individual line level as required. I'm just going to pause there in terms of coding, and yeah, just ask if you have any questions.
I have a question. So the invoices that don't come in as PDF, right? So they're scanned or whatever, and your AI goes through them. Do those automatically get forced to have someone verify that, yes, the system correctly took what was on this paper and converted it? You know, is there a special process there that those get flagged in some way?
Sure. So everything gets run through our technology and gets given an accuracy rating. So it has to be up to, I think it's 99.4 or 6%. I'll have to get the updated stats, but it has to be up to that sort of accuracy rating before the core information before it gets downloaded into the system. If there's any flags that come up where the system's not sure of something, or in scenarios where we haven't seen a vendor before because it might be a different invoice format that is being used, then that would essentially be flagged to a team that we have who manage the capture system essentially. So it would ask them a question, they would answer it, and then it would increase the accuracy rating. So that happens more commonly with new vendors. So I think we have over 300,000 vendors that we've onboarded and seen before. So they just increase our library, AI library essentially, and what's been captured before and what we've seen before. And then any that we're unsure of in terms of the accuracy rating get sent to an individual to review and then get sent back through the AI essentially once that validation has occurred.
So if for example, a vendor, you know, you've got a vendor that you've been paying, you know, every month, and suddenly this month there's an added line that hasn't been there before, right? Is that sort of thing going to get flagged? And, you know,
that sort of thing wouldn't get flagged because it's only the core bits of information that that might affect that. So for example, if we saw an invoice from a vendor that we've never seen before, something like, let me just show an example. Something like this vendor has invoice hashtag ... That's a completely different term as another vendor would use. They might have my ref or something like that. So it's those keywords that might differentiate for each vendor. And obviously our system needs to know what the relevant fields that we need to capture are, and invoice number being an essential one. So it would only need to learn those things for new vendors, but if something changed within that vendor, anything else, just different lines or a slightly different format within the text, then none of that would be incorporated in needing review. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So in terms of the red banner at the top here, that will just let us know if there's anything to complete before submitting it into the workflow. So the effective date is an MIP required field. So that's something that can be defined within here and is passed across within posting, for example. So that's something that can be applied to the transaction, and then the transaction can be processed for approval essentially. So if I were to then submit this for approval, I've got a couple of different workflows set up, but this can be aligned and configured based on your requirements. We're just going to send this to the department workflow because we haven't seen the invoice from this vendor before. Just asking me a question here, and then that's being processed within the workflow from here. It automatically then takes me on to the next invoice within my unprocessed tray, just because if you want to process a few, then it just takes you on to the next for speed and efficiency. I've on purpose not defaulted anything just so you can see what it looks like if we've sent an invoice in, you've set no defaults at all, and you know, you can layer up the automation over time. So it's essentially asking you what analysis you want to incorporate, and you can select any of the kind of analysis components that you want to, or you can set defaults straight away from within the user interface as well. Equally, we can set them up within the implementation, and they can be set against all suppliers in bulk as well. So you don't have to do it on individual vendor basis, but it's helpful to have it in the setup and then be able to make edits and additional automation rules within the UI as you're processing invoices. So you've got kind of different options there. We do, I don't have it turned on, but we do actually have a new line feature as well. So it actually, if you choose it to, you can just select the items from the line as well. So you can either code across lines, or you can choose the codes at individual line level as well. So you've got different usability options in terms of how you code at line level there as well.
On this one of the reasons we picked this type of invoice, so that over the phone interpretation might be services that 20 units used. So is there a way to like break out that line item into, you know, like I know this is what's going to import, but we would really need to break this out into smaller line items to code to each individual unit, and those may need to get approved by those at that unit, that line item, by different people at different units.
Sure. So the over the phone, the first line you're talking about might need to be.
Yeah, that'd be a good example for one to look, because I know that one would be, that's, you know, over the phone interpretation for clients, but they may be dealing with one of 20 programs. I mean, so each of those 20 programs, we have to identify and get approval to charge those programs for their portion of that.
Okay, so let me just select one of the codes, and then you can have a look what it looks like when we go into the edit screen. I'm just going to select something random for the sake of the demo here. But if I selected what I wanted to across that line to start with, what we could then do is we can click into a particular line, or you can click onto it from the front screen actually, and you could duplicate that and change it as you required. So if you wanted to add or add multiple lines and then adjust values, you can do that with the duplication essentially. So if you did want to add the same GL account code but then change the location, then you would be able to do that. But essentially it's not splitting it out within here. You'd be adjusting the values to determine what value you wanted against each department, if that makes sense in this particular example. That might tie into how you use the distribution code within MIP, and if that is a different example that you're referring to. I think this example is more, you might have different departments that it's related to, and then you would want that one invoice to be approved by multiple departments. Is that this scenario versus, I know you had another scenario.
Yeah, so this scenario, it might be $600 of that goes to Department A, 1,000 goes to Department B, 2,000 goes to Department C, 100 goes to Department D. And so we really need to split that 6,000 into the billable amounts to the different programs that utilize that service.
Sure.
Michelle.
Michelle, you had a question as well.
So like on this particular invoice that I sent you, this language line invoice, so it comes in as a, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a spreadsheet with 5 tabs at the bottom. When we process this one, we have to consolidate it all onto one tab. Now the unit numbers on this, because it gives us a charge detail. So there's a spreadsheet that gives all the charges for that entire month. And it you know, ties in the phone number that was used, the person that called it in, the unit number so it breaks it all down. When I get that, I have to combine all the charges from all the different pages onto one spreadsheet. I have to go in and I have to correct all the unit numbers that are associated with calls because people don't always know their unit number. So they give them the wrong number. So I'm having to go and match all the units that I don't recognize, that I know that are not ours. And then I have to go and investigate to find out what unit is supposed to be. And then I log all of that into the one spreadsheet where I've combined all the charges. Then I'm going to email that out to everybody and say, please give me an approval for your portion of this invoice. And I break it down very clearly on what their portion is.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then we have a testing. So there's interpreter services, and then there's testing, which is a different GL, and that's done a little different. So that being said, on how we process them now, and so that would fit it through your system.
Well,
And that would work through your system because that's how we do it now.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how that would work through your system, because then I'm wondering, once I get my spreadsheet, I'm email everybody and say, please give me check requests for your portion of the bill.
Mhm.
Or I have a lot of people, which I'm really, really pushing a lot of people to do standing POs, so that each time this bill comes in, I don't have to reach out to them for a check request for their portion. They've already authorized me. So I can go ahead without getting authorization from them, charge their unit for their portion of this bill. So there's some that I use standing PO that I can go ahead and authorize myself, and then some I have to go out into the organization to get approval from the individual units. So that being said, on how we do it now, would that all be covered through your systems? Like what would it look like through your system?
So in terms of, in this example, we're not going to capture all of your tabs because the system would have no idea what to do with that. And they're not all invoices. A lot of that is supporting documentation, which you're looking at and then processing manually. So what we would do in this scenario is capture the lines that have values on the invoice, because that would essentially, these three values here are totaling a sum. So logically within our system, we're able to obviously review the items where they've got a value against them and then total them up into a value that is on the invoice essentially. So if that, as a common rule, if that needs to be broken down further to, different codes, let's say, then additional lines will have to be added on the invoice as it's come through, because we're not going to know how to do that automatically.
So I would still need to manually process the spreadsheet. I would still manually need to process on my own in Excel. And then as I get those totals, then load and break down through Compleat, the system, through your system, I would then come up with the totals. I'd say this GL, this unit, there. So I would still manually have to do it myself on the Excel spreadsheet. But then I would enter those line items into Compleat.
Essentially for those types of examples that you're talking about there, because it looks like you're doing quite a lot of, you've got a summary invoice, but then you're doing quite a lot of maths in the background to be like, oh, this might be allocated to this GL, and then these different departments or locations need to allocate certain costs. So in those scenarios where you're getting a summary invoice and then you're coding in a different way, or an extended way, then that detail is going to have to be input into the system, or you can split out lines and then obviously change values in terms of what you want to allocate where. But essentially you'd have to break that invoice down how you need to then account for it from a GL or other coding perspective. What the system can do, however, is once you've allocated those codes, let's say you've got one line associated to the facilities department, one to a different department, and then another to a different department, then our approval workflow is quite clever. So it can say send that invoice to all three at the same time to approve the invoice. So you have that digital audit trail approval workflow within the application, even when an invoice needs to be sent to multiple users, multiple departments, or multiple locations, depending on how that's broken down and the approval workflow that's required.
Okay, so then my next question was something like this. When I send it out to everybody asking for their approval for their portion of this bill, I also send the bill and all of the backup work that I have done, because some units want to individually look at all the charges associated to their unit to verify that they are being billed for the correct. Like, they don't want to hinder paying the bill. They're going to go ahead and pay the bill, but they do want to go back and verify that each one of those calls are actually theirs. So when this invoice gets sent to everybody to get their approval. So you said, like, say there's 3 people on the invoice that need to get approval. It will send this invoice to all 3 of them at the same time. Will it send the Excel spreadsheet that I have associated with this invoice that shows the breakdown?
So if I'll check on the multiple invoice tabs, because I believe multiple invoice tabs, multiple Excel tabs, because you've got the invoice and then the other tabs are the supporting documents. I believe, and I will double check this, I believe when there's multiple tabs on an Excel document, we look at the first one of the invoice and download that. So in that scenario, as it stands, you'd have to then attach it if you wanted that to be attached within our system and visible within the approval workflow. You can add notes or whatever else. However, if multiple documents are sent within the same email, so one's an invoice and everything else is other, then we do automatically attach it alongside the invoice in the system as standard. So I don't know if you can get that, the invoice sent separately from the Excel document, but
it all comes together.
Yeah, then in that case, I think we just capture the invoice, and then the additional information, essentially, you would have to attach if you wanted it within our system, attach it within the accounts payable section. Yes.
So then, kind of under the same idea of this one, how it's broken down, have we gone over the AED invoice already? Because that's another one that's broken down, but that's broken down in a different type of way.
This one?
The AED, yes.
Yeah,
see, now that invoice comes in, and going back to standing PO, in the beginning of the fiscal year, the facilities department says, this, gives me a list of all the locations that are going to have this AED service. And they say, I authorize you to pay this bill every time it comes in. So when this AED comes in, it's billing us the $1,900 is for all the locations that we have services at. So I manually, when I key that invoice, I divide it, like I have an Excel spreadsheet, and I say 10 locations have the AED service. So I'm going to divide that 1,900 into 10 locations. And then when I'm keying into MIP, I manually, because each building and location has its own distribution, right? Where it has its own units and its own square footage and everything like that. So each portion of that $1,900 is broken down into each location equally. Then when I key in those locations, that amount then is drilled down to all the units that are in that building.
Mm-hmm. And
am I making sense?
You are. This might be John if he's on the line and can hear us, but I was just wondering how the actual distribution code works with MIP. Is there any automation around allocation when you have a distribution code where it assigns properties or not?
What we do is the facilities department every fiscal year is going to go and evaluate the locations by square footage and how much space each unit is taking up in that building. So each building could be different because it's housing different units in different amounts of people. So each building, then I get the budget, the building allocations from budget, and I load them in every fiscal year saying this location is broken down into this A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? In this amount, in this percentage. So now those allocations are locked into the MIP system. So I get an invoice like AED, and what I'm doing is manually plugging it in. And then each line, I'm going to the distribution code and I'm saying, take out a certain dollar amount of this invoice and apply it to this location. And it breaks it down and shows me each unit and the amount of money. And I put in the location. Then I go to the next line and then the next line and the next line until I've hit every single one of those locations that we have services at and charge them their portion of this monthly bill.
Sure.
That's it.
I think John's come off mute, but I'm going to
Yeah.
pause to see, because
Yeah,
you'll
I
be
can-
more au fait with the distribution within MIP than
Can
I
you hear
will.
me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So you would basically, so within Compleat, it also populates with distribution codes. So depending on if you're having to manually calculate the amount that you're charging to each of those 10 cost centers, for instance, you would have to create 10 lines for the complete entry, each line having the appropriate distribution code for that particular unit. Then when that information transfers to MIP, the distribution codes are going to allocate each of those 10 amounts across however many individual, permutations of cost centers are in MIP. So rather than you having to, as you do now in MIP, enter the line with the appropriate distribution code, as you were saying, and then enter the second line with the appropriate distribution code and third line with no. So you don't end up with 10 lines in that entry. You end up with, 100 or more because you're allocating each line. So
Yes.
the system would do that automatically when it transfers the transaction into MIP. So now, if there was a default way to break down, let's say you took this 1917 and there were 10 units and they were all given a proration of that amount, it's possible we could automate it even further. But going back to your last example, where each time you had to manually calculate how much was attributed to each cost center from the invoice itself. Again, Compleat's not going to be able to do that for you, right? So you'd still have to take the invoice, create the 10 lines of entry, but then from the distribution code standpoint, that would be handled by the system itself. So I think it would still,
So
still
through
save you some time.
So through Compleat, I'm going to break it down into each location. When it migrates over through to MIP, at that point, it's going to just go run through the building distribution. By Scott, it's going to run through the distribution codes. And at that point, it will distribute and drill down even further.
That's exactly right.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So you would just make sure you have the appropriate location.
So through Compleat, I would break it down on a first
code.
level.
Yes.
And then as it migrates to MIP, it will be then drilled down even further to the ultimate, each unit's in the right amount. Okay, perfect. That answers my question. I appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you, John. You were able to articulate that far better than I was. Okay. I think in the essence of time, I did send an invoice for approval. So I'm just going to move on and just show a few other features. And then if we need to circle back and review anything else, then we can do that. So essentially, the invoice that I sent through has followed the appropriate approval workflow. And I will go into the configuration of the workflow, but it is extremely flexible. And is dynamic as well. So you can set conditions on any of the MIP segments, whether it be the department, the location, distribution code, anything basically. So we'll have a look at that in a minute. You can set as many steps as you like, and the thresholds can all be configured around your requirements too. So we'll look at the user interface first, and then we'll look at the configuration. So if we just log off, and we're going to log in as an approver, which is going to have a bit of a different screen. If I can spell that right, there we go. Approvers will get email notifications, so they'll be prompted that there is an order or an invoice pending their approval, and then also our solution is mobile friendly as well, so you can approve, raise orders on the mobile optimized application as well. Logging in, an approver may just be an approver within the system, so they may not be able to access other things. They may just be approving invoices, approving orders, or they may have other roles in the system, creating orders, etc. But you can really reduce the view of information and make it relevant just to their department or location, for example, within the security and setup within the system. You can see they can access any invoices awaiting their approval to easily review and decide whether they want to authorize, add new comments, etc. or deny, potentially, in certain cases. They can see the same information, the detail, which might be the broken down version if Michelle's got 10 lines which need to be allocated across different departments or locations, the image of the invoice on the left-hand side, and then you can, where appropriate, give edit rights to approvers or not. So I thought Michelle would say no.
No.
That's just off for everyone. Michelle can edit.
Michelle, Michelle, give me some
Love
love.
I love
Not
that.
even special people? Come on.
All right, maybe a choice few.
Yeah, I'm
One or
kidding.
two. For a limited time.
The less people you have doing it, the less people can make mistakes. Yeah.
Correct.
You really got to earn that trust.
Yes.
I wish
Now,
I had
Kim,
Okay, you're
I
telling me I'm not
capability.
even anywhere close yet, Mark. I get it.
No. Kim is definitely, I trust her
Don't
completely.
worry, it's locked down. I get the message. And then they can't edit anything. All they can do is submit an approval comment. So they might say all fine, you know, whatever they want to say. They can add notes as well if they wanted to attach anything. There's all those same capabilities within the approval workflow. And then if they needed to deny it and send it back to you, Michelle, because they don't have edit rights, oh, by the way, X, Y, and Z, they can send it back to you and you can edit and resend it through the workflow as required.
Okay.
So that's either going to be approved or it might go on to a second level of approval, depending on how many levels of approval that you have. If it's over 50,000, it might be going on to a secondary approval, etc. So you can map out all your relevant approval workflows based on the requirements. And before we go into anything else, I will show you the capabilities within the approval workflow, because I think that's really important. So if we just go in configuration and manage workflow, hopefully you'll get a feel for how easy the setup and kind of maintenance of it is as well. So if we just click in a very simple example here, which is looking at, you know, departments, you might have different departments set up. So you might have the facilities department, you may have, I'm just going to put something else random in here, but you can have different people associated to different you know, levels, or there might be multiple people in an approval group. So if 2 people could approve at the same level or within the same department, you can have that. You can set dollar thresholds at each step as required, and then you can basically set conditions against anything you want. So a basic one would be, and I'm going to try and get this right because I got everything wrong to start with. So the location, which isn't your location, we could say if it is the, you know, IT operations, blah, blah, blah department, then send it to that particular workflow. That could be one or multiple things. So we've set one condition here, but you could set that based on a project or a vendor or, you know, department and location.
Could it be done by, sorry to interrupt, I get excited and I'm like, oh my God.
Me too.
So could this get set up? Because not, so say I send something out that needs to be approved.
Yeah.
I send it to the program manager, but say they only have $1,000 worth of signature authorization limit and their portion is 1,500. So I need to send it to the program manager so that they see it, but they don't have enough signature authorization to approve it. So it needs to go above them to the next supervisor that has that signature limit. So I still need to send it to somebody who doesn't have the limit so that they can see it and they know what's happening in their program. But ultimately, they don't have enough money authorization to approve it, and it needs to go beyond them to their supervisor. Can that all be set up in this?
You can do that in two ways, actually. So you can either have it go to the program manager and then the person who actually needs to sign it off, or you could have them in a kind of simultaneous position where they both see it at the same time, but it's only finally approved until the person who has the budget approves it. So you can actually have it, you know, not delayed, like, oh, this person needs to see it and then it goes to them. They could both be viewing it, but then it would only be finally approved when the individual with the budget has authorized it as well. So it requires those two to view it and approve it.
Perfect. Love it.
You can have
Okay,
those
thank you.
controls in there, which is all really neat. So yeah, the conditions can be based on anything, and we can work with you on that, and all of that logic would be set up within the implementation as well. So we'd map it out with you within the design. We'd configure this for you, but it's very easy for you to then click in. If you need to change anything, add anything, then you can do that as well. So these are the kind of simultaneous positions. Let me just save that because I've added something in. Go back into it. We've got a position 2 here, which has got a dollar threshold in it. So it's saying, you know, send it to this second level of approval, you know, if it's over this certain dollar threshold, but you can make this as simple or as complex as you like. It might be in between threshold, or there might be multiple people that would need to approve it at this level, etc. So it can be as simple or as clever as you like, really, within these capabilities.
Okay. Then my next question would be, we have people that move around a lot. We have people like we come in and going. So I might have a program manager that's over a certain program, but another program manager leaves. So program manager A is going to take care of program manager B, or, you know, contracts, and they're going to approve them temporarily until the position is filled. So people do move around a lot. Is that going to be easy or complicated to be changing all the if this, then this, if this, all these if statements regarding signature authorization? Is that going to be easy to update? Wow. So that because people do move around and they do fill in for other program managers.
Yeah, so you can, in a fill-in situation, you can, against a user profile, set a nominee. So you can actually say it needs to go to an alternate approver for a time period. So they would then fill in for that user. That could be on holiday, or, you know, someone's away, or they're just filling in for whatever reason. Or you can use the approval groups as well, which is very easy. So if you need someone else to approve at that level instead of a user, then you can just add another user into that approval workflow or level, and they can then take over that responsibility if needed as well.
So if somebody was filling in for somebody that, say, was on vacation, could they set that up on their side, or do they need to come to me to have me set it up that their work goes to the, you know, the work person that's out, their work goes to the person that's covering for them? Is that something that they can do on their side, or do they need to come to me to alter the system and update the system each time?
An admin function, so it would be an administrator, which usually there's a few of them that might have different roles and responsibilities. So hopefully not all on you, Michelle. You can designate some other people maybe to share that responsibility.
Right. And Kim has a question.
Kim.
Yeah, thank you. Boy, sorry. My brain is not back in full gear. And just as quick as I had a question, it fell out of my head. And yeah, I don't know. Go ahead. No, if I think of it again, I'll type it in.
I'm conscious that we're over time already, and I've barely scratched the surface with my.
I'm sorry, that was me.
No,
And
it's
me.
not a problem.
We're
Not a problem at
excited.
all. No, I love the excitement. I love the questions are great. So no, it's all good stuff. But I am conscious that we have gone over the time slot. So what might be a good idea is just to maybe see what other areas you want to cover today. And then I think for the integrated online buying and purchasing side, it would warrant a separate session so we can do that bit justice, because there's quite a lot of good stuff that we can show you there in terms of how that works. And in the meantime, we can obviously share pricing and, based on the users and invoices, you can review that and kind of see based on the accounts payable automation that you've seen today, and review that element, and then we can look at the ordering maybe as a secondary step. So how are you guys doing for time? If you do have kind of 5-10 more minutes, there might be it might be useful to get John involved just to have a look at kind of the integration or discuss the integration in a little bit more detail, because when invoices are approved, they of course get transferred across to MIP. So that process is automated, and that integration has been obviously built within our application to offer an automated accounts payable process to MIP customers, hence our conversation. So I think that element would be good to cover if you guys have a little bit more time, and then we can take the other elements as a secondary session.
What was
Yeah, I
Kim's
mean, I think we
question?
definitely want to see how it, but I do think we want to see how this interacts with MIP, because that is going to be ultimately very important with the, whether this is beautiful, but if it doesn't actually go into MIP very clean, or doesn't, if that's, then it suddenly starts going, wait a second. So I think that piece is kind of important for us to see.
100%. John, are
But,
you
yeah,
able to show that today? I'm putting John on the spot now.
Yeah,
John with
sure.
feedback.
I can. We can discuss it and I can demonstrate it, and we can talk a little bit about, the features and functionality of the API build out that we've provided.
Yeah. And I see Kim's question is kind of relevant, just the quickly, but like you're waiting on an approval, does it flag you like, hey, something's stalled, we're still waiting?
Yes, we have approval reminders and prompts that can be set up within the system, which Michelle will love.
Yes.
So you can set the time window as well. So you can be like, oh, okay, remind them every 24
Week.
hours.
Nice.
I was going to say 24 hours. Every 2 days, 3 days, you can set the time window. So I can, in my follow-up, there's been a few questions. So in my follow-up, things like this, I'll just provide you with the details of in terms of the different settings as well. But yeah, there's different time windows that can be set up to make sure those approvals are happening efficiently. There's also reports where you can track invoices pending approval, how many days outstanding, who they're sat with, all of those good things.
Nice.
Now on to MIP.
Are you sure? Okay. Yeah. Any other questions before we do that? Nope.
Yeah.
Does
Okay.
Kim have a hand up now?
that's a
or
hand.
from
Is that a high
before? I'm
five?
not sure. I think it might have been a high five, actually. I like that. I've not seen that on Teams before.
It's a high five because
Yay!
That was your
Michelle
question,
needs
right?
Michelle needs the reach out and slap you one.
Yes.
Yes.
Approval
Okay, go
reminders.
carry on.
Yeah, the visibility is huge because within the approval timeline too, you can see exactly where the document stands. So rather than, not being sure exactly who hasn't responded to the email or whose inbox it's sitting in or what have you. So, and then you can set up those nudges. So I'll go ahead and take the share if that's okay.
Yeah, please
Annabelle?
do. I was just visualizing the approval timeline for you while you spoke, because that was a good point.
So let me go ahead. I've got my own version. Are you able to see the what shall we do now, Susie?
We can, yeah.
Okay, so what I've done here is it's a little different configuration than Annabelle was using. I believe she had populated her chart of accounts, so to speak, with your segments. And what I actually have here is a chart of accounts. Oh, I had timed out. Let me log back in. I have to log back into my organization too. Give me just a second. Sorry, let me come down here. Get into the right org. So let's see, am I where I need to be here? So in the configuration, yeah, this is fine. And the configuration of this particular organization, when we set up Compleat, we actually set it up so that it mimics your chart of account structure in MIP. And Annabelle referenced a couple items that that are unique to MIP, including the distribution code. And if you want to have and as I click on the distribution code, you'll notice it pulls up all the distribution codes that are currently active in this organization's MIP system, because we're using the API, so it's dynamically linking those fields. Also, the effective date. If you want to be able to manage the effective date of invoices from Compleat and pass that effective date over to MIP, which may be different, of course, than the invoice date, you can do that. Now, the other thing I would mention, though, is that we can build in unique customization for each organization. So we have some clients that say, we don't want to enter the effective date, just have it default to the invoice date. And then we can either edit it in Compleat, or when it transfers to MIP, it does transfer as a unposted accounts payable invoice. So you can have the opportunity with them in MIP to go over and review and edit transactions as well. But obviously, we want to incorporate all those fields that you're ultimately going to need to populate your AP invoices in MIP in iCompleat. So when the transaction passes, it's completely coded and all the information is there. So in addition to all the segment coding and the distribution code and the effective date, if you have any user-defined fields in MIP that you've established, those can be established within Compleat too. So those can be populated before the transactions are passed. So the whole idea is that when the transaction comes into MIP as an unposted AP invoice, there's just a validation that takes place. And from Compleat, we can process what's called an invoice pack, which would allow you to very quickly validate that the appropriate number of transactions and the appropriate dollar value of the session that you're transferring, matches between the two systems. So just want to kind of set that stage so that and this is very unique. So when you're looking at other solutions, particularly those that say, yes, we have an integration with MIP, I would caution you to make sure that you drill down and see exactly what they mean by that, because it's quite possible that they're actually talking about an import-export iteration. They may not be able to capture all the coding that you have established in MIP. They may not be able to use the distribution codes as opposed to the individual account coding. They may not capture the line item detail as well as the header information from the invoice as it's established in MIP. So we're really mimicking and extending the reach of your codification into iCompleat so that you're capturing everything as efficiently as possible using the capture and the AI that's incorporated into Compleat. And then, that gives you the full codification and the capturing of the data. So when you do transfer it to MIP, it's, it contains all the coding that you need. So when we were designing it, does that make sense? Is that pretty clear? Yeah, great. Okay, so when we were designing it, the API integration, one of the questions was, well, how do we determine, when we're going to make the transfer of approved transactions from iCompleat into a session of MIP? So we actually decided to make that a user triggered iteration, and we do so by allowing you to access a utility that we call the connector. It's the iCompleat to MIP connector. And this actually just triggers the transfer of the transactions through the APIs of the two applications. And we've added some functionality here that, for unique situations. And I'll keep it at a fairly high level today, but then we'll, take your questions and we can talk a little bit more about any specific scenarios you may have. But you can see that we have, there's several options on here for initializing the system. So when we first set up Compleat and we establish the configuration, then we initialize it, and that it does the initial population of all the chart of accounts, distribution code vendors, etc. Going forward, then, when you add a vendor into MIP, and we definitely recommend that MIP be the source of the data. So if you're going to add an account, if you're going to add a GL account or a location or a department, or add a vendor or add a distribution code, you do so in MIP, and it's really the master record. And that's important for a couple reasons. Obviously, in MIP, when you set up an account, you're using the chart of accounts wizard, and it's applying all the account statement formatting and grouping and all the unique, things that you need to do in relation to an account. When you're setting up a vendor, you may be setting up 1099 information and so forth. So MIP really has a lot more of that background information as it relates to the coding than is kept in Compleat. So that's what you want to do. You want to maintain that information in MIP, but then iCompleat will automatically pick up that information from MIP. So again, you're not having to enter a vendor into both systems. You're not even having to, export, import between the two systems. It's dynamically linked, and it's going to automatically update Compleat. And that goes for discontinuing transactions or vendors or, account codes as well. So it's going to keep those values in sync. If I'm going to I'm going to open quickly here. I've got just an on-premise version of MIP populated. Now we do integrate with both MIP Cloud and MIP on-premise. Are you in the MIP Cloud at this point?
No, we plan on transitioning kind of soon.
Okay.
We actually have a meeting next week with them to try to plan out a transition, but right now we're on the in-house version of MIP.
So this looks familiar to you. And
Very.
when you go to the cloud, you'll actually have two user interfaces, the modern, and then you'll still have access to what we call the classic, right? So here's our AP transaction form, right? And so then if I go back to my, excuse me 1 second here, if I go back to the connector, all you do is you click on the send invoices to MIP button, and it's going to run through a little routine. And we built in some feedback here for you. So you can see it's getting the transactions. It shows that it picked up a certain number of transactions, and it posted this invoice 0060 into MIP, and there was 0 errors, right? So you do get feedback to make sure that everything happened correctly. It doesn't happen in the dark, so to speak. And then if we go back into MIP, come back into the transaction here, it's going to populate the invoice into MIP with all the coding. And, if there were distribution codes involved, it would have applied the distribution codes. It brings over both transaction descriptions as well as document descriptions. And in the on-premise version, it actually transfers in the copy of the invoice itself. So that document will now be tied right to the transaction in MIP. When you migrate to the cloud, the MIP API currently doesn't support the passing of the transaction. So what we've done is we've built a method where you can link to the image of the document within iCompleat, so that you can still get to the source document. And of course, we're hoping that MIP will ultimately provide the ability to actually pass the transaction into the cloud environment. But at this point, that's how we're handling linking the actual attachment to the transaction within MIP within the cloud environment. So basically, the other thing you'll notice if there's 1099, coding, it's going to pick that up too and populate it with the default 1099 information that's stored within the vendor record within MIP. Of course, again, this comes over as an unposted transaction, so all this information can be edited once it's over in MIP before you then subsequently post it and then create the disbursement as you typically would directly out of MIP. Go ahead. You had a question?
Yeah, the question, I guess, is for our internal team. How big of a concern would that be if the source document isn't getting transferred out? I mean, if we move to the cloud, and I thought we were planning on doing that right away, is that a showstopper?
I think as long as we can get to it, we're okay. I mean, ultimately, our biggest, I guess, our benchmark is it auditable? So as a transaction in MIP, if someone comes in and pulls it for audit, can we get the auditor the support they need to say, yep, that's a good transaction? So as long as the system gives us that function in some capacity, I mean, it'd be really nice if you could just click on the thing in MIP and pull it up. But if it's another click to go back into Compleat and pull it up, as long as we can get it and it's not onerous to get it, we'll be okay. We just need to make sure those transactions are auditable, that it's not just a line item, but that we can get to the backup.
I would want to see that, what that looks like, how that works, and how many points of failure does it add, right? Because when you're going between systems, you always add additional points of failure. So, I'd want to understand that just a little bit more.
Yeah, but that would be our main concern. Like if it
it
doesn't fail, we can get to it, and because there's a pretty good chance with how many programs we have, how many funders come in and do audits, program audits, financial audits. Almost every transaction we need to be able to back up. I mean, so that's our standard. Is it auditable?
Yeah, I guess just a couple of really quick points, as I've got to go in a minute as well. The Compleat application is cloud-based, so all of your invoices will be stored in a central location, all in PDF with any supporting documentation that's been sent in. So where you might be filing them or uploading them into MIP currently, that's all imminently going to be available with the audit trail, who's approved it, who's coded it, etc. So all of that timeline exists within the transaction in Compleat, and time and date stamped. We've got hundreds of customers and other finance systems where we just pass the URL link because, again, the finance system doesn't have the capability to pass a PDF. It's based on API integration and it's finance system dependent, version dependent, etc. Where the link comes back to iCompleat, you can view the invoice, but not only view the invoice, you can view all of the audit trail, supporting documents, etc. So Compleat becomes the document management system essentially, and has more information around workflow or circumstances of how that invoice has arrived and where it's got to. So yeah, hopefully we can overcome that, and with that link back to the document, and we can show you how that works, then that should provide you all you need from an audit perspective. And any questions that you have, we can obviously cover those.
And I think I'm sharing my screen again here now. And so this is the modern user interface within the MIP cloud. And you'll see here that, a typical accounts payable transaction, there's an attachments form here, which frankly is much nicer than what is in the classic UI, because if I click on this, you can drag and drop fields. If I want to add an attachment, you can see that you can click, drag and drop. You don't have to navigate through all that hierarchy that you do within the on-premise or classic interface. But what we've done here is populated this image invoice, and this would be the hyperlink then back to that document within iCompleat. And you can see we also populate it with the invoice number that was assigned, or the document number that was assigned in Compleat. And this definitely fulfills for our clients that are on the MIP cloud the audit requirements and facilitates their audit prep and processing and the provision of the appropriate documents to the auditors. So I think you can be confident that even within the cloud environment, it's going to fulfill that need. And there certainly are some advantages to MIP Cloud and some enhancements that you'll learn to love. But at the same time, when you do make the migration, you still have the classic user interface that you can use for those users that are just more comfortable using that environment, so to speak. So hopefully that's a quick way to address that, but we'll be happy to go into more detail should you come up with more questions related to the integration.
Thank you. That answered mine.
Thank you.
Perfect. Sorry about the going over by half an hour, but that was very useful to delve into your requirements and questions in more detail. So appreciate everyone's time today. We'll follow up with just some additional points to cover off some of your questions, and where more information is required or helpful, I'll send it across. And then also based on the volumes you've sent me, I'll send over some initial pricing as well, just so you can get a feel for what the annual subscription would be. I'll do a ballpark implementation, but it will be ballpark at this stage until we kind of get into the detail of what you would be looking for, whether it's AP, whether it's ordering, etc. So integrated online buying, when it came into the mix at the beginning of the conversation as well. So different things to discuss. And then based on that, we would welcome another session with you guys if you want to go into anything else in more detail, or to cover the purchasing automation side, because I think the integrated online buying piece would add a lot of value to your end-to-end process with visibility, AP matching, automation, etc. So that would be an exciting thing to show you.
Right now, we don't have any kind of purchase.
Would be huge. Love it, Kim.
Purchasing
can we have another high five?
So anything you can do to help in that area would be a vast improvement to our nothing.
I was nodding my head and synced Michelle when you were talking about it. I was like,
looking forward to it. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining, and we'll catch up again soon, hopefully.
Thank you, Annabelle.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
thank you.
Nice
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.